Hi everyone, Tammy here. Welcome to my channel and another video for my series Blythe Sewing Basics. You can find a link to those down below. I have a playlist with all the other videos in the series. This video I'm going to talk about picking a pattern. Now let me first say you do not have to have a pattern in order to sew for your Blythe dolls, and as proof of that, this little outfit that Miami is wearing right now does not require a pattern. I have a video in the playlist that shows you how to make this little skirt and another video that shows how to make this top. Neither one requires a pattern to successfully make this outfit. However, while there's nothing wrong with sewing for your dolls and not using a pattern, and I know a lot of people wing it and they do great with that, I'm kind of old school and I feel that it's useful to at least have an understanding of how a pattern works. And then if you want to veer off, then that's great. So I have a couple of books here, and honestly, I have not purchased a lot of sewing books as far as Blythe goes. I believe these are the only two that I have in my little tiny Blythe doll book collection. And the reason for that is that, well, first of all, they're not super cheap. You know, they go for usually, I believe, in the $30-ish range. I think the Hannon book, I bought this a long time ago. This damages from me, but I think I paid something like $40 for this. It is a beautiful book, though. I mean, it is just a amazing artistic work, very inspiring for sewing, and it does have, you know, actual instructions, but the instructions are in a different language. Okay, I am not able to read those instructions, right? I only read English, and so while there are step-by-step pictures, they're quite small, and there's really no text, you know, to follow. So honestly, I have not tackled these yet. This is sort of like an aspiration of mine. You know, someday I'd like to make some of these. Like this little dress especially is one that I think is super cute, and it doesn't look overly difficult. But again, you know, so here are the pattern pieces in the back. It just kind of overwhelmed me when I first got it, and I'm still kind of not ready to jump into a book that is not written in English yet to try to sew for my dolls, when there are many, many other options as far as making doll clothes and finding patterns that work for me. Same goes for this one. This is part of the Dolly collection. There's a lot of Dolly books. Very cute. I really like these. And, you know, these are actually not just for Blythe dolls. There's other size dolls that these patterns work for. But again, small pictures, nothing written in English, you know, not for the faint of heart. And like I said, I have a lot of other patterns that are available to me right now. So there are two types of patterns that you're going to find available when you start looking on the internet. And I would say, you know, just do a Google search. Just go into Google and look for Blythe doll patterns, Blythe sewing patterns, Blythe doll dress patterns. Whatever you're looking for, you will find lots and lots of information on there. And there are a lot of free patterns. Here's an example of a free pattern. It's a really cute A-line dress. I just made one recently. You can see this is that particular pattern. Okay, this is a free pattern. It's one of the first ones that pops up when you do a Google search, in fact. And a lot of people have done this on the internet. However, I will have to say I had a hard time with this pattern when I very first found it, because the instructions to me were not super clear. And I have to say that's on me. It's not on the person who wrote the instructions or the designer of the pattern or anything like that. Here the instructions are here. And my point is, the reason why I've been mentioning this is, when you have a free pattern, very often the instructions tend to be understandably quite brief. So this actually prints on a single page where you have this and you have the instructions, and that's it. There are no pictures, how-to pictures or anything like that. Honestly, when I saw Beth Ramsden make this on her channel back around Easter, the light bulb went off and I was like, oh, I understand how to make it now. For whatever reason, these instructions were not going through my thick noggin. So So that's kind of, I guess, because I'm a really visual learner, something like this I would struggle with. Whereas if I see somebody making it, then I find it much better. And that's something, generally speaking, and again, I'm being very general, I have noticed with the free patterns, there tends to be very little how-to information included with them. And so I hesitate to suggest that beginners jump on board with the freebies all the time when they might get frustrated because of the brevity of the instructions. Something else to think about whenever there's any type of free pattern, and this is really not just for sewing, but things like crochet patterns, knitting patterns, I have personally noticed that sometimes you can find errors in these, and that's because they're not tech edited. So unless a company puts out a pattern, for example, if I use the example of crochet, Lion Brand actually has, it's a brand of yarn. The Lion Brand website has tons of free patterns, but those patterns are put out by a company who's actually paying somebody to not only design the patterns, but also they are tech edited. And then on top of that, there's lots of people who have made the pattern. So if you do find a free pattern like this that you want to use, I would say find the pattern first, yes, and then go search and see who has made the pattern. Is there anybody on YouTube that's going to show you, like Beth did for this dress? Are there anybody in any of the sewing groups that maybe you're part of on Facebook that's made them? It's very useful to have these extra resources when you might have a freebie pattern. And plus, if there are any errors on a pattern, there aren't any on this, I have to say. But if there is a pattern that there is an error on, and I have found this before, usually somebody's already found the error by the time I find the pattern. So that's something useful to think about. That brings me to paid for patterns. And for me personally, I think sometimes they can be worth paying $5 or whatever, that anywhere from $5 to maybe as much as $15. It depends on the pattern. Sometimes to me it's worth it because you're going to get more information, typically speaking. And here's an example of a really good pattern. It's by Little Amelie, and she's very well known in the Blythe doll community. She created this pattern. I purchased just this pattern by itself off of her website. She also has a YouTube channel, and even though she doesn't speak English, her patterns are in English. Okay, the instructions are provided in English, and when you watch her videos, again, she doesn't speak English, but she shows you the techniques. For example, there was one on how to make, she has a video on how to make, stitch this little gathered sleeve to the top. And I don't understand what she's saying, but when I watch her video, I'm able to understand what she's doing. And so the combination of having instructions, detailed instructions in English with pictures, colored pictures even, and her YouTube channel that shows techniques, I find super useful. You can see here I've cut out some of the pieces. This is a sample one that I made, and I leave that in there to remind me about some of the things that I need to remember when I make it. So I'm kind of a pro. I'm pro buying patterns sometimes. I think it's a good way to support people in the hobby, and it can help you, especially if you are doing a new technique or if you're new to sewing. That said, there aren't a lot of commercial patterns available. This is a really old one that I managed to find on eBay. It's very hard to find. They don't make this anymore. If you're able to find this, though, on the back of it has information about how many pattern pieces are in it, and the notions you need and the amount of fabric. So this is a standard commercial pattern that most people are used to seeing if you're going to make something like for example, McCall's has a line of American Girl 18-inch patterns, so you can find that for them, but it's hard to find them for Blythe dolls. But you might be lucky, you might be able to find this. It's not inexpensive, I will say, if you are able to find it. So something else to remember when you are looking for patterns is pay attention, especially to the pictures that they show. Keep in mind, a lot of us have different types of Blythe dolls. These are both fakie dolls. This doll has the typical jointed fakie body. This doll has more of a traditional body that the stock dolls have. This body is not the same as this one. This one is a teeny bit bigger in some areas. And so what can happen is if you buy a pattern or find a free pattern, sometimes you might think that it's going to fit this doll and it doesn't. It fits this doll. And if you go look, I mean, what doll are they showing wearing the dress? Are they showing, or whatever pattern you're doing, pants or whatever, are they showing a jointed doll wearing it, or are they showing a traditional doll wearing it? Very often, I've noticed they seem to be made for traditional dolls, and so you would need to make adjustments to the pattern if you want to do make it for the bigger dolls. And that might be something just as simple as using a smaller seam allowance, you know, instead of a 1/4 inch seam allowance, maybe you use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. But definitely keep in mind which type of doll body is the pattern made for, so that you don't end up making something and then it doesn't fit your doll. That can be a major bummer, needless to say. And that's where having your little notebook that I mentioned in a previous video where I talked about notions and specialty tools, having a notebook that you keep notes in about patterns can be very helpful. You can put in there that, oh, maybe you're going to use a pattern that you found that fits the traditional doll body, but you made a change and you were able to make it fit the larger fakey doll body. Put that in your notebook and make sure you, of course, go read your notes before you make the item again. Also, what's really cool that you can do with a lot of these patterns is that you can alter them. And that's another reason why I really like buying or finding, you know, good free patterns versus trying to reinvent the wheel myself. Here's an example of a top that I made. This is a top, the top of this is the top of a dress. I bought the pattern from Dolly Delicacies, and then instead of attaching the skirt portion to it, all I did was leave it as is, and then of course I had to finish off the edges at the bottom, which is not part of the normal pattern, but now I have a cute little midriff top. And yeah, I was able to adapt the pattern very easily and turn the dress pattern into just a top pattern. So here's an extreme example of some of a pattern that I used and I altered it big time. Again, this was a typical Blythe doll dress pattern, but the top of it had 3/4 inch sleeves. I lengthened the sleeves, okay. I lengthened the top. It was supposed to be more like here, so I added a couple inches down here. I turned it backwards, so this would be the front of it, but I flipped it around, and then I turned over the sides of it and stitched it open to make little lapels for this jacket. Okay, this is part of the collab that I did for with Dolls Rescued. We did a collab for Maleficent, and so he's the Raven guy that's with Maleficent. So you can do a lot of things. So just don't be put off by, oh, I have to pay $5 for a pattern. Very often you can take that pattern and alter it and do all kinds of different things using just one pattern that maybe you paid $5 for. Granted, some of them are more expensive, but typically that means that there's probably more to the pattern as far as instructions and that kind of thing. If you're not sure, always check reviews. You know, check reviews, join doll groups. There's a couple of really good sewing groups on Facebook for Blythe dolls. One of them is called Blythe Sews, and that one's a really good one. So you could always post over there, hey, has anybody used this pattern before? What are your thoughts? Before you spring the money up and buy the pattern. By the way, if you are looking for some possible patterns to try out, I definitely recommend the Maggie dress by Dolly Delicacies. No affiliation. However, she has offered a coupon code to my viewers, Kawaii Doll 20. Kawaii Doll 20, when you head over to her shop, you can get 20% off at least a $5 or more purchase. And I would say the Maggie dress is one of my favorites. I've used it quite a bit. I've altered it quite a bit. And in fact, that's the one I used to make this little jacket here. I altered it to make the jacket. And that's the one, yeah, that's the one that I made this top from. So yeah, and I've made this dress a whole bunch of times. And yeah, so if you want to get 20% off her patterns, head over to Dolly Delicacies on Etsy. So when you are picking a pattern, one thing to check and see is how many pattern pieces there are. This is one pattern piece. It's cut on the fold. So you actually cut 2 of these out because it's lined, but really it's one pattern piece. Typically the smallest number of pattern pieces to a pattern, the easier it's going to be. So this is clearly a super easy pattern because you only have one pattern piece. Something like this, on the other hand, while it's not super duper hard, it may not be appropriate for a beginner, because you can see here she's got, just by looking at it, you can think, well, there's a pattern piece for the skirt, right? And then she's got the sleeve, the collar, a cuff, a front piece that goes over this top, and a top piece. So that's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pattern pieces at least for this little outfit. So as a beginner, I would suggest something like this and build up to something like this. All right, I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, as usual, put them in the comments down below. I'll do my best to answer them. If you have any requests, also put those down below. Thank you for spending a little time with me. Again, I have more videos in the works, especially for my Blythe Sewing Basics series. But if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and have a wonderful Dolly Day. Bye-bye.